The day I opened that wall changed everything I thought I knew about our small town. My name is Michael Reynolds. For 25 years, I've been haunted by the mystery of 3 nuns who vanished without a trace from St. Catherine's Convent in Millfield. I was just a young reporter when it happened in 1992, my first big story. I interviewed witnesses, investigated leads, wrote headlines that gradually shrank in size until the case went cold completely. Life moved on. I became editor of the local newspaper, then mayor. The convent closed and was transformed into the new town hall. Everything seemed to have been forgotten, until that morning in 2017. "Mayor Reynolds, you need to come here immediately." The construction foreman's voice trembled on the other end of the line. "We found something when we removed the wall between the kitchen and pantry." I remember looking at the 3 suitcases hidden in that secret space. Decades of dust settled on them. A silver rosary, a pair of reading glasses, a journal interrupted mid-sentence. Objects I recognized from old photographs, belongings of the missing nuns. They had never left the convent, and this was just the beginning of a truth far darker than anyone could have imagined. What I discovered led me from a small Massachusetts town to the mountains of El Salvador, unearthing a plot of corruption, betrayal, and murder that involved the church, a powerful Boston businessman, and 3 brave women who refused to remain silent in the face of evil. This is their story. This is my story. And if you want to find out what really happened to the 3 nuns of Millfield and the deadly secret that remained hidden for 25 years, don't miss the next chapter of this series. Before we continue, I need your support. If this story has already captured your attention, please click the subscribe button right now. Every like and comment helps me continue telling stories like this one. Share it with someone you know who loves mysteries based on real facts. And get ready, because the truth we found behind that wall will change everything you thought you knew about faith, power, and justice. I still remember that cold December morning in 1992, when our small town of Millfield, Massachusetts woke up to the news. 3 nuns from St. Catherine's Convent had vanished overnight. Sister Agnes, Sister Martha, and Sister Josephine, fixtures in our community for over a decade, were simply gone. I was just starting my career at the Millfield Gazette back then, a fresh-faced reporter of 24, eager to make my mark. Editor Frank Donovan assigned me to cover what everyone initially assumed was a simple misunderstanding. "They probably went on a retreat and forgot to tell someone," he said, chewing on his unlit cigar. But something felt off from the beginning. Their modest belongings remained untouched in their rooms. Sister Agnes's reading glasses still rested on her worn Bible, a bookmark placed carefully in Psalms. Sister Martha's medication for her arthritis sat on her nightstand, doses missed for the first time in years, according to the Mother Superior. And Sister Josephine's journal entry from the previous evening ended mid-sentence. The convent, a converted Victorian mansion on the edge of town, became the center of a growing investigation. I remember walking through its hushed corridors, the winter light filtering through the stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across the worried faces of the remaining nuns. "They would never leave without telling me," Mother Superior Catherine insisted, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her rosary. "Something happened to them, Mr. Reynolds. I feel it in my soul." The police conducted searches of the grounds and surrounding woods. Volunteers from town formed search parties that combed every inch of Millfield. Missing person reports were filed. The FBI even sent an agent from Boston to assist with the investigation. I interviewed everyone who might have seen something. The groundskeeper who claimed he heard a vehicle late that night. The gas station attendant who remembered serving coffee to strangers passing through. The neighbors who noticed nothing unusual at all. For weeks, the story dominated the front page of our paper. I gathered facts, chased leads, and wrote article after article. But as winter turned to spring, the trail grew cold. Other news pushed the missing nuns to the inside pages, then to brief mentions, and finally to silence. The community held a memorial service 6 months after their disappearance. I sat in the back of St. Catherine's Church, watching candles flicker as prayers were offered for the safe return of Sisters Agnes, Martha, and Josephine. But everyone knew the truth. After so much time, we were really saying goodbye. Life in Millfield moved on. The convent eventually closed due to dwindling numbers. The building stood empty for years before being purchased by the town for administrative offices. I married, had 2 children, and eventually became editor of the Gazette. The mystery of the 3 nuns became part of local lore, a story told to newcomers, a footnote in Millfield's history, until 2017, when everything changed. I never planned to get involved in local politics. Journalism had been my life for over 2 decades. But when Mayor Henderson died unexpectedly of a heart attack in early 2017, the town council approached me to fill the remainder of his term. My years of covering Millfield's triumphs and troubles had given me a unique perspective, they said. People trusted me. After much deliberation and encouragement from my wife, Sarah, I accepted. The transition from observer to participant in town affairs felt strange at first. Instead of reporting on council meetings, I was leading them. Rather than interviewing officials about infrastructure problems, I was the one fielding questions. One of the projects I inherited was the renovation of the old convent. The town had been using it for storage and occasional meetings, but the building had fallen into disrepair. The council had approved funds to convert it into a proper town hall and community center before Henderson's death. I remember walking through the building with Gary Winters, our town engineer, examining cracked plaster and warped floorboards. The place had good bones, as they say, but needed significant work. "We'll need to remove this wall," Gary said, tapping a section between what had once been the convent's kitchen and an adjoining pantry. "It's not original to the building, and it's blocking the natural flow of the space." The renovation began in March. I visited the site weekly, watching as workers stripped away decades of neglect. There was something satisfying about seeing the old building come back to life, about preserving a piece of Millfield's history while giving it new purpose. April brought steady rain and complications. The project fell behind schedule as workers discovered more issues: ancient wiring that needed replacing, a leaking roof that had caused hidden damage, asbestos in some of the older insulation. It was during one of these delays that I received a call from the project foreman, Mike Delgado. His voice sounded strained. "Mayor Reynolds, you need to come down to the convent right away. We found something when we were removing that wall between the kitchen and pantry." "What kind of something?" I asked, already reaching for my coat. There was a pause. "I think you should see for yourself, sir." 20 minutes later, I stood beside Mike in the dusty, half-demolished kitchen. Workers had cleared the area, and a section of drywall had been removed, revealing a hidden space behind. "We noticed the measurements weren't adding up," Mike explained. "The pantry seemed smaller than it should have been, given the exterior dimensions. There was a false wall, probably built sometime in the early 90s. My heart began to race. "And behind it?" Mike shined his flashlight into the narrow space. "3 suitcases, and these." He handed me a small plastic bag containing 3 items: a silver cross on a chain, a pair of wire-rimmed reading glasses, and a small leather-bound journal. I recognized them immediately from old photographs and witness descriptions. Sister Josephine's cross, Sister Agnes's glasses, Sister Martha's journal. The missing nuns had never left the convent at all. The next few hours passed in a blur. I called Police Chief Lauren Martinez, who arrived with forensics officers and cordoned off the site. News spread quickly through town despite official attempts to keep it quiet. By evening, vans from Boston news stations lined the street outside the convent. I found myself on the other side of the press conference, standing next to Chief Martinez as she addressed the reporters. Many were former colleagues, their faces showing the same mix of professional interest and personal shock that I felt. At approximately 11:30 this morning, construction workers at the former St. Catherine's Convent discovered evidence possibly related to the 1992 disappearance of 3 nuns, Chief Martinez stated. The investigation has been reopened, and we are treating this as a potential crime scene. Questions flew. Was there evidence of foul play? Had remains been found? Were there suspects? The chief deflected most with practiced ease, promising updates as information became available. Back in my office, I sat with Detective James Wilson, who had been assigned to lead the investigation. Though he'd been just a rookie when the nuns disappeared, he remembered the case well. "This changes everything," he said, spreading old case files across my desk. "We always assumed they'd left the premises, that they'd been abducted somewhere outside the convent or had chosen to disappear for some reason." I nodded, studying a yellowed newspaper clipping, one of my own articles from 1992. The focus was always on who might have seen them in town, or whether they'd mentioned travel plans to anyone. "We need to look at everyone who had access to the convent back then," Wilson said. "Maintenance workers, delivery people, regular visitors, and the other nuns," I added quietly. The implication hung heavy in the air. The suitcases contained clothing, personal items, and documents that confirmed they belonged to the missing women. Forensics would take time, but initial examination suggested they had been packed for travel. The hidden space behind the wall was roughly 8 feet long by 3 feet wide, large enough to conceal evidence but not bodies. I spent the evening in the archives of the Gazette, now run by my former deputy editor. We pored over every article about the disappearance, looking for details that might seem significant in light of the new discovery. A quote from the convent's maintenance man caught my attention. "They were worried about something those last few weeks. Sister Agnes asked me to check the locks twice, which wasn't like her." Another piece from a local shopkeeper. "Sister Josephine came in for supplies the day before they disappeared. She bought more than usual and seemed in a hurry. What had the nuns been afraid of? Where were they planning to go? And most importantly, where were they now?" The discovery had reopened not just the investigation, but also old wounds in the community. That night, people gathered for an impromptu vigil outside St. Catherine's Church, lighting candles for women who had been missing for 25 years. As I stood at the back of the crowd, Sarah squeezed my hand. "You've been given a chance to find answers," she said softly, "for them and for Millfield." I nodded, feeling the weight of dual responsibilities, as mayor and as the journalist who had first covered their disappearance. I needed to help find the truth wherever it might lead. The forensics team worked through the night, carefully documenting and collecting evidence from the hidden space. By morning, they had cleared the site, taking the suitcases and their contents to the state crime lab for further analysis. Detective Wilson called me around noon. "We've got preliminary permission to examine Sister Martha's journal," he said. "Given your history with the case, I thought you might want to be present." An hour later, I sat in a conference room at the police station. The journal lay on the table, now sealed in a clear evidence bag. It looked smaller than I remembered from the photos, a worn leather volume with a simple cross embossed on the cover. Wilson carefully opened the bag and, wearing gloves, began to turn the pages. Sister Martha had neat, precise handwriting, her entries dated and organized. The journal covered nearly a year, from January 1992 until her final entry on December 12th, the night before the disappearance. Most entries were mundane, notes about prayer services, community outreach, garden work. But in late October, the tone changed. Sister Agnes spoke with Father Michael again today, read an entry from October 23rd. She returned upset. Something about the financial records doesn't add up, she says. I worry about her getting involved. November 7th. Sister Josephine overheard a conversation that troubled her. She won't tell me details, says it's better if I don't know. This secrecy isn't like us. November 19th. Father Michael has been removed from his position with the Diocese Financial Council. No explanation given. Sister Agnes says we must be careful now. December 5th. Someone was in our rooms today. Nothing taken, but things were moved. Mother Superior says I'm imagining things, but Agnes believes me. The final complete entry, dated December 12th, read, "We've made our decision. Agnes has made arrangements. We leave tomorrow night after evening prayers. God forgive us for the secrecy, but we see no other way." The documents are, the sentence ended abruptly, as if Sister Martha had been interrupted. Wilson and I exchanged glances. "What documents?" he asked. "And what did they know that made them feel they needed to flee?" I added. We spent the afternoon piecing together what we could. Father Michael Donato had been the parish priest at St. Catherine's in 1992, also serving on the Diocesan Financial Council. After leaving Millfield in early 1993, he had moved between several parishes before retiring to Florida in 2010. According to public records, he had died in 2015. We need to look into the diocese financial records from that period, Wilson said. And we need to find out more about Father Donato's sudden removal from the council. I nodded, my mind already forming connections. The timing can't be coincidental. Whatever the nuns discovered, it happened right around when Father Donato was removed from his position. And someone knew they were planning to leave. Wilson added grimly. The journal entry stops mid-sentence. The wall was built sometime after their disappearance, and their packed suitcases were hidden there. The implications were disturbing. This wasn't a case of nuns choosing to abandon their vows, as some had speculated over the years. Nor did it seem like a random abduction. This was deliberate, targeted. As I drove home that evening, memories from 1992 resurfaced. I remembered interviewing Father Donato shortly after the disappearance. He had seemed genuinely distraught, leading prayers for the missing women. Had his concern been an act? Or had he too been a victim of whatever conspiracy the nuns had uncovered? I recalled Mother Superior Catherine's insistence that the nuns would never leave without telling her. Perhaps she had been right in more ways than she knew. Perhaps they never intended to disappear forever, just long enough to gather evidence or seek help. Something had stopped them before they could leave, and someone had gone to great lengths to hide the fact that they had planned to. For the first time in 25 years, we had a real lead. But as any journalist knows, following the money is often dangerous work. These women may have paid the ultimate price for their discovery. And now, as we reopened their case, I wondered if we might be putting ourselves in the same danger. The Boston Archdiocese wasn't exactly eager to cooperate with our investigation. Initial requests for financial records from 1992 were met with delays and bureaucratic obstacles. It took a formal subpoena, arranged through the district attorney's office, to finally gain access. I accompanied Detective Wilson to the diocesan archives, a climate-controlled room in the basement of the administrative building. A nervous young clerk and a significantly less nervous church attorney met us. These records are over 25 years old. the attorney, Ms. Patel, explained. They were only partially digitized, and the organization system was different then. We've pulled what we could based on your request. Several boxes of financial statements, meeting minutes, and correspondence sat on a large table. The task ahead seemed daunting. "We'll need copies of everything," Wilson said firmly. Ms. Patel nodded. "You can use that scanner, but I should note that diocesan financial matters often involve confidential information about donors and internal church affairs." 3 women disappeared, I said, more sharply than I intended. If there's information here that explains why, confidentiality concerns become secondary. We spent hours sifting through documents, most seemingly irrelevant. Quarterly budget reports, maintenance expenses for various parishes, donation records. Nothing that screamed financial impropriety. Then Wilson found something interesting in the minutes from a November 15th, 1992 Financial Council meeting. Listen to this. Father Donato raised concerns about irregularities in the St. Sebastian Fund allocations. Matter referred to internal audit. And that was just days before he was removed from the council, I noted. What was the St. Sebastian Fund? More digging revealed that the St. Sebastian Fund had been established in 1987 to support missionary work in Central America. Significant donations had flowed through it, primarily earmarked for building schools and medical clinics in El Salvador and Nicaragua. In a folder of correspondence, we found a letter from Sister Agnes to the Archdiocese dated November 28, 1992. It was brief and carefully worded. Regarding our conversation of November 22nd, I am enclosing copies of the documents discussed. I believe they conclusively demonstrate the discrepancies I mentioned. In good conscience, we cannot remain silent on this matter. No documents were attached to the file copy. Whatever Sister Agnes had sent had been removed or filed elsewhere. She was building a case, Wilson said. The question is, against whom? And what happened to her evidence? As we continued searching, a name kept appearing in connection with the St. Sebastian Fund. Thomas Gallagher, a prominent Boston businessman and major Catholic donor who had served as the fund's chairman. According to the meeting minutes, he had personally overseen many of the fund's operations and had made frequent trips to Central America to monitor the projects. Gallagher, I murmured. Why does that name sound familiar in connection with this case? Back at the police station, we searched the original case files and found our answer. Thomas Gallagher had been interviewed briefly in 1993 because his construction company had done renovation work at St. Catherine's Convent in early 1992. The interview notes showed nothing suspicious. He had visited the convent a few times to check on the work, but had no significant contact with the missing nuns. His company did renovations at the convent, Wilson said slowly. And then, less than a year later, someone with construction knowledge built a false wall to hide evidence. And Gallagher was involved with the very fund that Sister Agnes was raising concerns about, I added. We looked up Thomas Gallagher's current status. He was now in his 70s, still living in Boston, and still a prominent figure in Catholic philanthropy. His construction company had grown into a major development firm run by his son, Thomas Gallagher Jr. We need to talk to him, Wilson said, but carefully. If he is involved, he's had 25 years to cover his tracks. I nodded, feeling a familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension. The sensation I always used to get when a story was breaking open. But this wasn't just a story. It was about 3 women who had disappeared while apparently trying to expose wrongdoing. Women who might have paid with their lives for their integrity. As we left the archives, Miss Patel approached me. Mayor Reynolds, there's something else you should know. After receiving your subpoena, the Archdiocese conducted an internal search. There was a sealed file related to St. Sebastian Fund investigation, but it's missing from our records." "Missing?" I repeated. "Since when?" "We don't know. It could have been misplaced during digitization, or—" She hesitated. "Or deliberately removed," I finished for her. She didn't deny it. "The Archbishop wanted me to assure you that the Church is committed to finding the truth, no matter where it leads. Some things that happened in the past, the current leadership does not condone them." As we drove back to Millfield, I thought about her words. What exactly was the current church leadership not condoning? Financial mismanagement? A cover-up? Or something much worse? The next morning, I met with Wilson at the station to review what we'd learned and plan our approach to Gallagher. Before we could get started, his phone rang. After a brief conversation, he hung up with a grim expression. That was the State Crime Lab. They found something interesting on the suitcases. Soil traces that don't match the convent grounds. Red clay with high iron content. Not common in Massachusetts, I noted. Number, but very common in parts of Central America. The connection to the St. Sebastian Fund's work in Central America couldn't be coincidental. We decided to dig deeper into the fund's activities before approaching Gallagher. Wilson reached out to the FBI, who still had the original case in their files, to request assistance with international aspects of the investigation. Meanwhile, I contacted an old journalism colleague who now worked for the Boston Globe's investigative team. Without revealing our recent discoveries, I asked what she knew about Thomas Gallagher. "Old Boston money, very connected politically," she told me. "His reputation is solid on the surface, but there have been whispers over the years. Nothing that ever stuck." "Whispers about what?" His construction company had some questionable contracts in the late 80s and early 90s. There were allegations about bribes to officials in Central America, but nothing was ever proven. And there was something about a church charity he ran, donations that never reached their intended destinations. I asked her to send me any articles the Globe had published about Gallagher or the St. Sebastian Fund. An hour later, I was reading through digitized copies of news stories spanning 3 decades. Most were positive profiles or mentions of Gallagher's philanthropic work, but a small piece from 1994 caught my attention. Federal investigation into Catholic charity closed. The brief article mentioned that after a preliminary inquiry into financial irregularities at several church-affiliated charities, including the St. Sebastian Fund, authorities had found insufficient evidence to proceed with charges. I called Wilson immediately. The feds investigated the fund in 1994, but the case was closed. We need to get those files. "Already ahead of you," he replied. "The FBI agent assigned to help us is requesting the archived case records, but it might take a few days." We couldn't wait. That afternoon, we drove to Boston to pay Thomas Gallagher an unannounced visit. His company occupied the top floors of a sleek downtown office building. The receptionist informed us that the senior Mr. Gallagher was semi-retired and only came in occasionally, but his son was available. Thomas Gallagher Jr. was a polished version of his father, same strong jawline and confident bearing, but with a more modern sensibility. His corner office showcased both family photos and architectural awards. "Mayor Reynolds and Detective Wilson from Millfield," he said, shaking our hands. "This is about those nuns, isn't it? It's all over the news." Wilson nodded. "We're following up on all connections to St. Catherine's from that time period. Your father's company did renovation work there in 1992. Ancient history," Gallagher Jr. said with a dismissive wave. "Dad's nearly 80 now, and his memory isn't what it used to be." I doubt he'd remember details of a project from 25 years ago. We'd still like to speak with him, I said. And we're also interested in the St. Sebastian Fund, which he chaired during that period. Something flickered across Gallagher Jr.'s face. Surprise, perhaps, or concern. He recovered quickly. The fund was dissolved in the late 90s after completing its mission. What possible relevance could it have to your case? That's what we're trying to determine, Wilson said evenly. How can we contact your father? After some back and forth, Gallagher Jr. reluctantly provided his father's address in Beacon Hill and agreed to call ahead to let him know we were coming. As we left, he added, "My father has dedicated his life to serving his community and his church. I hope you're not planning to drag his name into some sensationalized story about missing nuns." His defensiveness only intensified my curiosity. In the car, Wilson voiced what I was thinking. He got nervous when you mentioned the fund. Very nervous, I agreed. And notice he immediately assumed we were going to sensationalize something. We never suggested any wrongdoing. Thomas Gallagher Sr. lived in a magnificent brownstone on a quiet, tree-lined street. A housekeeper showed us to a book-lined study where the old man waited, seated in a leather armchair. Despite his age, he remained imposing. Tall and straight-backed, with a full head of silver hair and piercing blue eyes. "Gentlemen," he said, gesturing to a sofa across from him. "Tommy says you're looking into that sad business with the nuns from Millfield. Tragic affair. I remember when it happened. Shocked the whole Catholic community." His manner was cordial but guarded. We started with basic questions about the renovation work his company had done at St. Catherine's. He answered readily, claiming to remember the project reasonably well. "Beautiful old building," he said. "We replaced some plumbing, fixed the roof, renovated the chapel. I visited a few times to check the progress, met the Mother Superior, formidable woman, and some of the other nuns. Don't recall much interaction with the ones who disappeared, though." When Wilson smoothly shifted the conversation to the St. Sebastian Fund, Gallagher's demeanor cooled noticeably. "That was a successful charitable initiative that built schools and clinics for poor communities," he said. "What possible connection could it have to your investigation?" "We found evidence suggesting Sister Agnes had concerns about the fund's finances," I said, watching him closely. "She communicated those concerns to the Archdiocese shortly before she disappeared." Gallagher's expression hardened. "Young man, I've spent my life building a reputation for integrity in business and philanthropy. If you're implying I had something to do with financial impropriety or, God forbid, the disappearance of those women, you'd better have more than vague evidence about concerns." The conversation grew increasingly tense. Gallagher answered our questions but revealed nothing substantial. As we prepared to leave, he fixed me with a stern gaze. "Mayor Reynolds, I understand you were a journalist before entering politics. Let me give you some advice. Be very careful about pursuing baseless allegations against respected individuals. It rarely ends well for anyone involved." The veiled threat hung in the air as his housekeeper showed us out. "Well, now that was illuminating," Wilson said as we walked to the car. "He's definitely hiding something." "But after 25 years proving it won't be easy," I replied. "We need those federal investigation files." As I started the engine, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street, its driver watching us intently. When I pointed it out to Wilson, the vehicle pulled away from the curb and disappeared around the corner. Someone was taking an interest in our investigation. And I had a feeling we were getting closer to dangerous truths. The next morning, construction workers made another discovery at the convent. While removing flooring in what had been Sister Agnes's room, they found a loose floorboard. Beneath it was a small metal box containing a flash drive and a handwritten note. The note, in Sister Agnes's handwriting, was brief. If found, deliver to Father James Collins, Boston Globe reporter Michael Reynolds, or FBI agent Diana Marshall. I stared at the paper in Wilson's office, a chill running through me. Michael Reynolds. That's me. She wanted to get information to me. Wilson nodded. You were covering their story. She must have trusted you to investigate whatever they'd found. Father Collins was a retired priest who sometimes helped at St. Catherine's, I recalled. He died in 2005, and we should try to locate this FBI agent. The flash drive presented a problem. It was an older model, and the files were encrypted. The police department's tech specialist couldn't access them, so Wilson sent it to the FBI's digital forensics lab. Meanwhile, we learned that Agent Diana Marshall had retired from the Bureau in 2008 and now lived in Arizona. Wilson arranged a video call with her the following day. Marshall was in her 70s now, but her mind remained sharp. When we explained the situation, she leaned forward, her expression intense. I remember that case, she said. I was investigating allegations of money laundering through charitable organizations. The St. Sebastian Fund came up on our radar because of large cash transactions and unusual transfer patterns to banks in Central America. Did you know the Nuns had contacted you? I asked. She shook her head. No, but it makes sense. About a month before they disappeared, I received an anonymous tip about the fund. Someone sent photocopies of ledgers showing discrepancies between reported donations and actual expenditures on projects. I began building a case, but then, Wilson prompted. Then the investigation was shut down, orders from above. I was told the evidence was insufficient and resources were needed elsewhere. I always suspected political pressure. Gallagher had powerful friends. You think the Nuns were your anonymous source? I asked. It seems likely, and if they were planning to come forward publicly or provide more evidence, she left the implication hanging. Do you still have any of the documents from your investigation? Wilson asked. Nothing official. Those would be in the FBI archives, but I kept personal notes. After the case was closed and the Nuns disappeared, something felt wrong. I made copies of key documents before surrendering the case files. Against protocol, but my instincts told me to preserve the information. Marshall promised to send her notes and copies of the documents she'd retained. They arrived by secure courier the next morning. A thick envelope containing photocopies of financial records, handwritten notes, and a typed summary of her suspicions. As Wilson and I reviewed the materials, a pattern emerged. The St. Sebastian Fund had indeed been building schools and clinics in Central America, but the costs reported were massively inflated. According to Marshall's analysis, nearly 60% of the donations never reached their intended destinations. Where did the money go? I wondered aloud. A document near the bottom of the stack provided a clue. It was a photocopy of bank records showing transfers from a Salvadoran bank to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The beneficial owner of those accounts was listed as Gallagher Investments Limited. He was siphoning money from his own charity, Wilson said, using construction projects in Central America to launder the funds back to himself. And the Nuns discovered it, I added. Probably when Sister Agnes, who had accounting experience, noticed discrepancies in the financial reports to the diocese. Marshall's notes included a timeline that aligned perfectly with what we'd pieced together. The anonymous tip had come in late October 1992. By November, pressure to close the investigation had begun. By early December, she was ordered to stand down, and on December 13th, the Nuns disappeared. Later that day, the FBI lab reported success with the flash drive. The files were being sent securely to Wilson. We gathered in the conference room with the police chief and district attorney to review them. The drive contained dozens of files, copies of financial records, photographs of construction sites in El Salvador and Nicaragua, and most damning, a series of audio recordings. Sister Josephine, who had worked as a secretary before joining the convent, had apparently recorded several conversations using a small tape recorder, later transferring them to digital format. In one recording from November 1992, Thomas Gallagher could be heard speaking with Father Donato. Gallagher: "Those women need to mind their own business. Do they understand what's at stake here?" Donato: "I've tried to dissuade Agnes, but she's determined. She says it's about moral accountability." Gallagher: "Moral accountability won't build schools or feed children. The end justifies the means." Donato: "That's not how the church sees it, Tom. And if the diocese discovers the full extent of what's been happening..." Gallagher: "They won't, unless someone tells them. Make sure that doesn't happen, Michael, for everyone's sake." Another recording, dated December 10th, captured a heated exchange between Sister Agnes and someone identified only as Mr. G. Mr. G: "You don't want to pursue this, sister. Some matters are better left alone." Agnes: "We cannot ignore corruption and theft, even when it's disguised as charity." Mr. G: "You have no idea who you're dealing with or what forces you're disrupting. Walk away, for your own safety." Agnes: "Are you threatening me?" Mr. G: "I'm advising you. Strongly." The final recording was the most disturbing. A brief conversation among the three nuns on December 12th, the night before they vanished. Agnes: "Everything's arranged. The bus leaves at 11 p.m. tomorrow. We'll take the documents directly to the Globe and the FBI office in Boston." Martha: "I'm frightened, Agnes." Josephine: "We all are, but we can't stay silent." Agnes: "We'll be careful. No one knows our plans except Father Collins, and he's agreed to help us." The recording ended with the sound of a knock at the door. A heavy silence filled the conference room after we finished listening. The district attorney, Ellen Ramirez, was the first to speak. "We have enough to bring this to a grand jury. Financial crimes, obstruction of justice, and potentially much worse. We still don't know what happened to the nuns themselves," Wilson pointed out. "The soil evidence from the suitcases points to Central America," the police chief reminded us. "Gallagher made frequent trips there. He had construction operations in the region." I thought about the years of silence, the wall hiding the suitcases, the buried flash drive. They were going to expose him. He couldn't let that happen. As the meeting concluded, I stepped outside for air. The town I'd known all my life suddenly felt different, shadowed by secrets I was only beginning to uncover. 3 women had tried to do the right thing and had disappeared because of it. Now, 25 years later, we might finally bring them justice. But one crucial question remained unanswered. Where were Sisters Agnes, Martha, and Josephine now? The FBI formally joined our investigation the next day, sending a team that included agents specializing in cold cases, financial crimes, and international operations. Our small-town police station became the center of an expanding investigation that now reached beyond Millfield to Boston and Central America. While federal agents began the process of obtaining warrants for Gallagher's financial records and communications, Wilson and I focused on a lead from Marshall's notes. She had flagged a particular construction project in El Salvador, a school in the mountain village of San Miguel de Los Angeles, where the reported costs were especially inflated and the documentation suspiciously thin. The project had broken ground in November 1992 and was completed in February 1993. timing that aligned perfectly with the nuns' disappearance. More significantly, Thomas Gallagher had personally visited the site multiple times during construction, according to fund reports. Working with the FBI's international liaison, Wilson arranged for Salvadoran authorities to examine the site. The school was still standing, serving the local community. No one there remembered anything unusual about its construction 25 years earlier. But when ground-penetrating radar was used to survey the foundation and surrounding area, something unexpected was discovered. 3 anomalies beneath the concrete floor of what had originally been a storage room at the back of the school. 3 distinct shapes, roughly 6 feet long each. The images reached us on a Friday afternoon. I sat in Wilson's office, staring at them on his computer screen, a cold weight settling in my stomach. "We need to get down there," Wilson said quietly. "I'm going with you," I replied, not a question, but a statement. He nodded, understanding my connection to the case. "The FBI team leaves tomorrow morning. We'll meet them in San Salvador." I called Sarah to explain. She was worried, but supportive as always. "Bring them home, Michael," she said. "They've waited long enough." The journey to El Salvador was long and tense. As our plane descended into San Salvador, I gazed out at the mountainous landscape, thinking about the 3 women who may have made a similar journey under very different circumstances. Had they been alive? Had they known what awaited them? We were met at the airport by FBI agent Carlos Mendez, the Bureau's liaison with Salvadoran authorities, and a local police detective named Rosario Fuentes. They drove us to a modest hotel where the rest of the team was already setting up a temporary command center. "The local authorities have secured the school site," Mendez explained as we reviewed the operation plan. "We'll begin excavation tomorrow morning. A forensic anthropologist from the Salvadoran National Police will oversee the process." That night, I barely slept. My mind kept returning to the grainy radar images, 3 distinct shapes beneath concrete poured in the winter of 1992 to 93. I thought about Sister Agnes's determination to expose the truth, Sister Martha's fears, Sister Josephine's quiet resolve. Had they known in those final moments that their quest for justice would lead them here? At dawn, we drove into the mountains. The village of San Miguel de Los Angeles was small and remote. A cluster of modest homes surrounding a central plaza with the school prominently positioned beside a small church. Children should have been arriving for classes, but the building stood empty, cordoned off by police tape. Inside, the storage room had already been cleared of shelves and supplies. A team of workers was carefully cutting through the concrete floor with specialized saws that minimized dust and vibration. The process was painstaking. Each section of concrete had to be removed intact to preserve any evidence beneath. By mid-afternoon, they had exposed the soil under the entire floor. The forensic anthropologist, Dr. Elena Vasquez, directed her team to begin carefully removing dirt from the areas identified in the radar survey. "We must proceed with extreme care," she explained to us. "If these are indeed human remains, they will be fragile after so many years." Hours passed as they worked with brushes and small tools, slowly revealing what lay beneath. I stayed despite Wilson's suggestion that I might want to wait elsewhere. These women had tried to reach me with their evidence 25 years ago. I wouldn't abandon them now. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the windows, Dr. Vasquez called us over. In one of the excavated areas, they had uncovered fabric, rotted and discolored, but recognizable as black cloth. And beneath it, the unmistakable shape of human bones. "We have remains," she said quietly, "and based on the positioning and what appears to be clothing, I believe we have found what you are looking for." Over the next 2 days, the team meticulously exhumed 3 sets of remains. Each was found in a similar position, suggesting the victims had been kneeling when they died, then toppled forward into shallow graves. Preliminary examination indicated gunshot wounds to the back of the head in each case. With the remains, they found metal crucifixes, a corroded pair of eyeglasses, and fragments of what had once been simple black habits. Items that matched what we knew about Sisters Agnes, Martha, and Josephine. The local villagers gathered outside the school, placing flowers and candles near the entrance. Many crossed themselves as the body bags were finally carried out. An elderly man approached me as I stood watching. "I helped build this school," he said in Spanish, which Agent Mendez translated. "The American men brought us here. They said it was for the children." "Did you see anything unusual during construction?" I asked. He hesitated, fear briefly crossing his weathered face. "One night, there was activity. Trucks came late. We were told to stay away. The next day, they poured the concrete for the back room very quickly. Too quickly, but no one asked questions then. It was not safe to ask questions." "Did you see 3 women, American women dressed as nuns?" He shook his head. "I saw nothing, but we heard rumors of people who disappeared. It was a bad time in our country. Many disappeared." Before leaving El Salvador, I stood alone in the excavated room, now an empty shell with 3 rectangular pits in the dirt floor. The walls had been freshly painted many times over the years, covering whatever secrets they might have held. But beneath the floor, the truth had waited patiently for 25 years. "We found you," I whispered to the empty space, "and now we'll bring you home." The process of confirming identities and returning the remains to the United States took nearly 2 weeks. DNA testing confirmed what we already believed. The 3 women buried beneath the school floor were indeed Sisters Agnes Kelly, Martha Winters, and Josephine Diaz. While we waited, the investigation accelerated on multiple fronts. Armed with the evidence from the flash drive and now the discovery of the bodies, federal prosecutors moved against Thomas Gallagher. FBI agents raided his home and offices, seizing computers and documents. His son, Thomas Jr., was also brought in for questioning about his potential knowledge of or involvement in his father's activities. Financial forensics experts began unraveling decades of transactions, following the money trail through offshore accounts and shell companies. The picture that emerged was damning. Millions of dollars diverted from charitable donations, laundered through construction projects in Central America, and funneled back to Gallagher Enterprises. I returned to Millfield ahead of the remains, needing to prepare the community for what was coming. The story had already made national headlines. Missing nuns found buried under church-funded school. Boston philanthropist accused in decades-old murder case. Cold case breakthrough. Mayor uncovers deadly charity fraud. The town council held an emergency meeting to discuss how to handle the media attention and support the police department through the ongoing investigation. The current Mother Superior of St. Catherine's Order, though now based in Boston since the convent's closure, reached out to coordinate memorial services. On a personal level, I struggled with my connection to the case. As both mayor and the journalist who had originally covered the disappearances, I found myself in an unusual position. Simultaneously a public official managing a crisis, an investigator who had helped uncover the truth, and a community member processing a tragedy. Sarah noticed my distraction one evening as I sat staring at old newspaper clippings in our living room. "You're thinking about what you might have missed back then," she said, sitting beside me. I nodded. If I had dug deeper, asked different questions. "You were 24, Michael. A rookie reporter in a small town. No one connected the dots, not the police, not the FBI, not the church. Sister Agnes tried to connect them. She wanted to get information to me. Sarah took my hand. And now you've helped find the truth after all these years. That matters. The remains arrived in Boston on a Tuesday morning. Wilson and I were there as the caskets were transferred to hearses for the journey to Millfield. A small crowd had gathered: local clergy, members of the Nuns' Order, reporters, and curious onlookers. Thomas Gallagher was conspicuously absent, having been denied bail after his arrest the previous week. The funeral mass was held at St. Catherine's Church, now filled beyond capacity. I sat with Sarah near the front, alongside Detective Wilson, Chief Martinez, and other officials involved in solving the case. The current Bishop of Boston delivered a homily that acknowledged the painful truth without directly addressing the church's failure to protect the women or properly investigate their disappearance. Sisters Agnes, Martha, and Josephine exemplified the highest calling of faith, to seek truth and justice even at great personal cost, he said. Their lives were taken because they refused to be silent in the face of wrongdoing. Their legacy challenges us to examine our own courage and commitment to righteousness. After the service, the three were laid to rest in the small cemetery behind the church. As people dispersed, an elderly priest I didn't recognize approached me. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm Father Thomas Morgan. I was a young priest in the Boston Diocese in 1992. I knew Father Collins, the priest Sister Agnes trusted. Did you know about their concerns?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not then. Father Collins told me years later, after he was ill and knew he was dying. He carried such guilt for not doing more to help them. He said they had come to him, afraid but determined. They showed him documents about financial irregularities in the St. Sebastian Fund. He advised them to gather more evidence before going public. Did he know they were in danger? He suspected it, especially after they disappeared. He tried to tell the authorities his concerns, but without concrete evidence." The old priest sighed. The church was different then. Problems were handled internally. Scandals were buried. "Like the nuns," I said quietly. He nodded, his eyes sad. Father Collins believed until his death that powerful people in the church had been complicit. Not in the murders, perhaps, but in the cover-up afterward. He said someone had to have known or suspected what happened, yet chose to look away. The trial of Thomas Gallagher began 6 months later. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, the nuns' own documentation, the recordings on the flash drive, and testimony from former employees of both the construction company and the charity created a damning picture. Most devastating was the testimony of Gallagher's former head of security, Manuel Ortiz, who had been granted immunity in exchange for his cooperation. Ortiz described in chilling detail how Gallagher had discovered the nuns' plan to expose him. He said they had to be stopped, Ortiz testified. He told me to make arrangements to bring them to El Salvador, to show them the good work the charity was doing. Once there, they were held at a company compound for 2 days while Mr. Gallagher tried to convince them to stay quiet, when they refused. Ortiz described how local contractors associated with Gallagher's operations had carried out the killings and burials, with the school construction providing perfect cover. He implicated Thomas Gallagher Jr. as well, saying the son had helped arrange the construction of the false wall at the convent to hide evidence of the nuns' planned departure. I attended much of the trial, watching as the man who had threatened me in his Beacon Hill home now sat diminished in a defendant's chair. He never looked in my direction, never showed remorse or emotion as the details of his crimes were laid bare. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and 3 counts of first-degree murder. At 79 years old, Thomas Gallagher was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. His son received 15 years for his role in the cover-up and financial crimes. As I left the courthouse after the sentencing, a reporter called out to me, "Mayor Reynolds." Does this bring closure for Millfield? I paused, considering the question. Justice and closure aren't always the same thing, I replied. We now know what happened to 3 brave women who stood up for truth. We can honor their memory properly. But the loss to our community, and the fact that it took 25 years to uncover the truth, that's a wound that doesn't simply close with a verdict. Back in Millfield, life gradually returned to normal. The renovation of the old convent was completed, though the design was modified to include a memorial garden where the kitchen and pantry had been. The hidden space behind the false wall was preserved as a small museum, telling the story of the 3 nuns and their quest for truth. I sometimes visit there, standing in the quiet space where suitcases had waited for 25 years to tell their story. I think about Sister Agnes, who had tried to reach me with what she knew. I think about evidence buried and truth revealed. And I think about how some walls, once built, can stand for decades. But eventually, if we are persistent enough, they come down. 1 year after the trial, I stood at the podium in the newly renovated town hall, once St. Catherine's Convent, to dedicate the Sisters Agnes, Martha, and Josephine Memorial Library wing. The space, bright and modern yet respectful of the building's history, would house both town records and a special collection documenting the case that had changed our community forever. These 3 women believed in truth, I told the gathered crowd. They believed that light should shine in dark places, that wrong should be named and confronted, that silence in the face of corruption is its own kind of sin. Today, we honor not just their memory but their mission. The audience included Detective Wilson, now promoted to chief following Martinez's retirement, Agent Diana Marshall, who had traveled from Arizona for the occasion, and several members of the nuns' religious order. Also present were relatives of the 3 women, nieces, nephews, cousins who had spent decades wondering what had happened to their loved ones. Sister Josephine's nephew, Miguel Diaz, spoke on behalf of the families. For 25 years, we lived in uncertainty. We prayed, we hoped, we feared. Now we know that our beloved sisters died as they lived, with courage and conviction. Their story will inspire generations to come. After the ceremony, as people mingled and explored the new space, I found myself in conversation with Elena Vasquez, the forensic anthropologist who had overseen the excavation in El Salvador. She had accepted a visiting position at Boston University and had been consulting on the memorial. You know, Mr. Reynolds, in my work I have seen many burials, ancient ones from archaeological sites and modern ones from criminal cases. The way these women were placed tells its own story. What do you mean? I asked. They were killed while kneeling, probably in prayer. Even in their final moments, they maintained their dignity, their faith. Their killers may have thought they were burying a problem, hiding evidence. Instead, they created a testament. Her words stayed with me as I walked through the building later that evening, after most guests had departed. The old convent had been thoughtfully transformed. Original architectural features had been preserved and highlighted. Ornate woodwork, stained glass, the chapel now a meeting room that retained its reverent atmosphere. In the new library wing, displays told the story of the 3 nuns and the investigation that finally brought them justice. Photographs showed them in life. Sister Agnes with her serious expression and wire-rimmed glasses. Sister Martha, the oldest, her face kind and weathered. Sister Josephine, the youngest, with a hint of mischief in her smile. Other exhibits documented the saint. Sebastian fund fraud, the construction of the Salvadoran school, and the discovery of the hidden wall with its concealed suitcases. The flash drive Sister Agnes had hidden beneath her floorboard. now preserved in a small glass case, held a place of honor. A section dedicated to journalism's role in uncovering truth included copies of my original articles from 1992, alongside more recent coverage of the case's resolution. Seeing my byline on those yellowed newspaper pages, Michael Reynolds, staff reporter, felt like looking at the work of a different person. In many ways, it was. Sarah found me there, studying a timeline of the investigation that spanned 25 years. "The reception's wrapping up," she said. "Ready to head home?" I nodded, taking a final look around the room. It's strange to think how long the truth was hidden. All those years, life in Millfield just went on. People moved away, others arrived, the convent closed, I changed careers. Children grew up never knowing there had been 3 nuns who disappeared. "But you never forgot them," Sarah said. "Even before the renovation, even before the wall was discovered, you kept their story alive?" That night, I dreamed of the convent as it had been in 1992. Corridors filled with the soft sounds of women at prayer, winter light through stained glass, 3 faces turned toward me in hope and fear. In the dream, Sister Agnes handed me her journal, saying simply, "Tell our story." I woke before dawn and went to my home office. From a drawer, I removed a notebook filled with my observations and thoughts throughout the investigation. For months, I had been considering writing a book about the case, not a sensationalized true crime account, but a thoughtful examination of courage, corruption, and the long path to justice. That morning, I began writing. I titled the manuscript, "3 Village Nuns Vanished in 1992. 25 years later, the mayor opens a wall and finds this." The title was both factual and evocative of the mystery that had captured national attention. The process of writing took me back through every step of the journey, from my early days as a reporter covering the disappearance to the moment the wall was opened, from the excavation in El Salvador to Gallagher's trial and sentencing. I explored not just what had happened, but why it had remained hidden for so long and what it revealed about institutions, power, and silence. 6 months later, as I completed the final chapter, I received news that added a poignant coda to the story. The Boston Archdiocese announced the formation of the Agnes Kelly Fund for Transparency and Accountability, an independent foundation that would provide resources for whistleblowers and journalists investigating wrongdoing within religious and charitable organizations. The current Archbishop, in establishing the fund, acknowledged the Church's failure to protect the 3 nuns or properly investigate their concerns. Their deaths represent not just a criminal act by individuals, but a systemic failure to value truth over reputation, he stated. "We honor their sacrifice by ensuring such failures never happen again." My book was published the following year, becoming a New York Times bestseller, and eventually being optioned for a documentary series. I donated a significant portion of the proceeds to the Agnes Kelly Fund and to scholarships for young journalists at the local community college. The story of the 3 nuns became part of Millfield's identity, not as a dark secret, but as a legacy of courage. Each year, on the anniversary of their discovery, the town holds a day of service and remembrance. Schools teach their story as part of local history. And the memorial garden at the town hall has become a place of quiet reflection, with 3 simple stone benches arranged around a fountain. Sometimes, when town business keeps me late at the office, I sit in that garden as dusk falls. I think about 3 women who saw wrongdoing and refused to look away. I think about walls built to hide truth and the persistence required to break them down. I think about how justice, though delayed, still matters. Not just for the dead, but for the living who carry their memory. And I remember Sister Agnes's final journal entry, cut short when someone knocked at her door. The documents are... We now know what those documents were and what they revealed.